Welcome to our best text roundup for Marvel Snap this week. Blink is showing up in a bunch of really interesting deck lists as well as Hela. Let's go ahead and dive on into the details, shall we? My first Jeff's pick this week is my personal favorite Blink brew, a deck I've been calling Blink 3/6. The basic idea of this deck is very straightforward. An ideal curve involves playing either Electro or Wave on turn 3, so we can play Blink on turn 4 to turn that 3-drop into any of the 6 drops still in our deck, since there are no 4 or 5 energy cards that we're playing. Then, in an absolutely perfect world, our turn 5 involves playing any of our other 3 energy cards, as well as Grandmaster, to have Blink turn that second 3-drop into another 6-drop on turn 5. And then we ultimately close the game out by slamming a third 6 energy card on the last turn of the game. The deck list rounds out its slots by playing some of the best 1 energy cards in the game in Sunspot and Nebula. And if you're missing Red Hulk, to be honest, I'm not even 100% convinced this card's ideal with Blink overall, since when it flips out of your deck, it didn't have time to charge up. I think you can easily sub Giganto in that slot. My second Jeff's pick this week is a Khazar Swarm deck that I honestly wasn't expecting a lot from when I imported off of Untapped earlier this week, but it's really impressed me. The small clutter package that it plays with White Widow and Debris does a really good job of constricting board space in key matchups like Hela. The deck goes wide across the board thanks to things like Squirrel Girl getting powered up by both Khazar and Blue Marvel, and the deck can go tall when that's what you need to be doing thanks to threats like Cull Obsidian and Mockingbird having really efficient energy costs for the stat lines that they provide. Nocturne adds a nice little bit of finesse to this deck, letting you get into hard to reach places like Crimson Cosmos and Sanctum Sanctorum. That being said, I don't think she's absolutely necessary to play it. You can substitute a different location variance mitigation tool such as Scarlet Witch or Snow Guard to have a very similar effect. Other Series 5 cards that are replaceable in this deck are definitely Cull Obsidian could swap for Crossbones, and White Widow could be a different 2 energy play such as Silk that just provides points on the board. I do think Mockingbird is pretty important to this deck overall, though. She frequently gets as cheap as just 1 energy thanks to Squirrel Girl and Debris, so I think you'll definitely want to pick her up if this is something you want to play. Moving along to our high potential category, these are all deck lists that have smaller sample sizes on Untapped so far, but have really impressive metrics in that smaller sample. Any of them have the potential to be Marvel Snap's next big thing, in my opinion. We kick off this category with a really innovative Pixie Thor Blink deck. So at the core, you have that Thor into Beta Ray built into Jane Foster package that spreads stats out nicely all around the board. And your other 0 energy cards play really well with Pixie, who can shuffle these cheap costs onto our 6 energy bombs at the top, as well as get traded out with Blink for something else directly in the deck. Mobius is definitely a must-have card here to mitigate some of Pixie's downside, and Armor does a phenomenal job of protecting our larger threats that Blink is putting into play ahead of curve. As far as replaceable cards in this deck list go, I think you could easily sub out Red Hulk for a different 6 energy bomb, such as regular Hulk, Giganto, or Doctor Doom. The rest of these Series 4 and 5 cards in this deck, however, I think are pretty core to what it's doing, and the deck's likely to be a lot worse off if you replace them. Our next high potential deck list is a fan favorite Cerebro 3. I would wager a big part of this deck list promising stats right now is it looks to be one of the best ways you can kick your opponent's sandcastle over in Marvel Snap. Whether it's Valkyrie boosting your Cerebros and chopping their big things down to size, Mobius proactively locking them out of their plays, US Agent making their large cards incredibly smaller, or Killmonger absolutely blowing away all their 1 energy cards, this deck list really has the ability to do it all. I think one thing that's especially interesting about this deck list is that it's not playing any direct location interacting cards like Rhino or Scarlet Witch. It does have Quake, which is a phenomenal Getcha card that can rearrange the board on the last turn, but it does mean that there's going to be a number of locations that if they flip up, you're going to have to simply not play to them or not have your Cerebro bonus at them. Our last high potential deck list this week is a really fantastically innovative Black Knight Blink deck. This deck list is using a variety of ways to get big 6 energy cards into play ahead of curve. You could discard them with Blade or Sift to set up a large Ebony Blade or Ghost Rider. You can utilize Hope Summers to play 6 energy cards on turns 5 and 6. You can soak 6 energy on the 5th turn of the game so you can slam She-Hulk and Infinite on the last turn. And Blink even has some really phenomenal curves in this deck, such as you discard a fatty on 3, you Ghost Rider it back on 4, and then you blink that Ghost Rider into another large 6-drop on turn 5, giving you massive stats in a single lane. Armor seems absolutely necessary in this deck to make sure nobody's kicking over the giant cards you're putting into play early, but I really like the look of this one overall, and I hope it takes off. Moving along to our top performing decks, we have another Blink innovation featuring the Dark Hawk package. So we've got Korg, Rockslide, and Hawk as a pile of stats, and then we have Kitty Pryde, Angela, Jeff, Hope Summers, and Nocturne as a mover/grower package at the bottom end of the curve. This particular deck list is also leveraging Leech as one of the more popular ones, but to be honest, I'm a little up in the air as to whether or not Leech feels optimal in this list. One thing Leech does that can be a little bit awkward is that if you play Rockslide and then blink it, sometimes you'll end up with Leech instead of a 6-drop, which isn't always optimal, so I personally have been playing Black Widow in that slot, but this is the more popular build, playing the 4 energy card. As far as potential replacements in this deck list go, I do think Hope Summers and Darkhawk and Kitty Pryde are not replaceable. Red Hulk could likely be subbed out for Magneto, and I think Nocturne could easily be another 3 energy card, or even another cheap mover like Silk or Nightcrawler to give you largely the same effect. Our second top performer this week is another Blink deck that's, it's Hela. Predictably, Blink seems to have made Hela more powerful and more consistent, much to everybody's dismay. I really wish they would have pre-nerfed Hela when Blink was coming out, like they pre-nerfed things like Viper and Kitty Pryde in the past, but, you know, she's here. Enjoy your casino gaming. Moving along to the most popular category, according to Untapped Metrics, various lockout iterations claim that #1 spot after our most recent OTA. This deck list looks to use Professor X, Dr. Octopus, and other various clutter means to lock an opponent out in a lane on turn 5, and then you can utilize things like Cannonball and Red Hulk to beat your opponent up in a second lane to lock out the game. This deck list makes excellent use of the card Magic, because frequently you're going to clutter your opponent's board up to the point where they can't make meaningful decisions, making turn 7 kind of asymmetrical, where you get to play the game and they don't. While this particular deck list does contain a number of higher series cards, I think a lot of them are replaceable, with the deck still being fairly powerful. Ravonna, I would say, is the one that's really important to have, since getting Professor X down a turn early is often a way for you to cheese out a lot of wins. Red Hulk can be another big 6 energy card like Magneto. Cannonball can substitute for another card like Shang-Chi that can chop your opponent's cards down to size. And White Widow and Jeff can be other efficient 2 energy cards that you can play on curve, such as Mojo, who really loves it when both sides of the board are getting filled up. Finally, our second most popular deck this week is Patriot Ultron. Ultron got his bots buffed to a base 2 power this week, making gamers flock to trying him out. While there are a ton of people playing a bunch of different iterations of this archetype, these 12 cards on your screen are one of the best performing by the metrics post-infinite on Untapped. Overall, I will say, though, that Ultron stats leave a little bit to be desired. I'd be surprised if this deck has staying power as the format moves forward. They definitely made the card a bit better, so people who really like the idea of what it's doing can play it and be a bit less embarrassed. But overall, I think Ultron's predictable output range, in combination with the fact that the numbers it makes ultimately aren't that much bigger than what other things like Hela are doing, make it difficult to keep up with, and ultimately have very poor cube equity against better players. It definitely bears saying that the 9 decks in this video are not everything that has reasonable stats on Untapped right now. Overall, the Marvel stat format is pretty diverse and open, and it feels like you could be successful with a lot of things. As always, snapping and retreating appropriately is the most important part of climbing or finding success inside of formats like Conquest. It's also worth noting that when it comes to like my personal Jeff's picks and the high potential deck, I definitely bias them in favor of finding things featuring the new cards if they're having strong performance, while obviously top performing and most popular are far more organic than that, going purely by the metrics. As always, I'd love to know what you're finding success with in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed my roundup this week, make sure to snap that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other roundups here in Hoaglandia.